The oil and gas industry, which is a major source of Nigeria's revenue, has been a source of concern to stakeholders. The problems, issues, and challenges associated with the management of revenue accruing from the sector has continued to elicit divergent views from experts who have identified mismanagement as the bane of the industry. Advocating for accountability and transparency in the management of petroleum resources, the Nigerian Natural Resource Charter (NNRC), a think tank group set up to benchmark the nation's natural resources management in line with the international best practices, held a one-day workshop in conjunction with the Center for Public Policy Alternatives. It was with the theme, Energy Subsidies, How Sustainable, Options and Implications for Development.
The Nigerian Natural Resource Charter is a good way of basically understanding and explaining the oil and gas industry in Nigeria. The NNRC, as it's called, for the Nigerian Resource Charter, is basically it's a reference point. It's a good reference point to understanding where we are in good governance of oil and gas in Nigeria. Basically, benchmarking the Nigerian situation vis-a-vis the international best practices. So, for instance, the Nigerian Resource Charter will explain in its precepts, its principles, how Nigeria should be working, allocating those resources, especially petroleum. Whether it's we should subsidizing it, how should we subsidize it, and how we should use that resource for the betterment of the people and for the future. So that documentation, that reference point as the Nigerian Resource Charter, it's a great starting point in really understanding and explaining the situation of the oil and gas in Nigeria and benchmarking it with international best practices.
We use the Natural Resource Charter to understand the arguments for or against removal of fuel subsidies.
Just as it is in the industry, there were positions taken about fuel subsidy.
Debate about subsidy or no subsidy. In fact, there are some people who argue, a former petroleum minister is one of them, who's arguing that there is nothing like a petroleum subsidy. That argument can be made if you argue that the cost of, take the cost of producing a barrel of crude oil in Nigeria. Take the cost of refining that barrel of crude oil in Nigeria. Take the cost of transporting that refined product to a distribution center in Nigeria. Add a margin to it. And the cost will be below the fixed price of petroleum. That's the argument. Except that if you consider that the cost of the underlying feedstock, crude, is sold on the international market at an international price, a standard price. And so whether even if you make that argument, you would sell the product for a higher value, and the difference between that higher value and this lower value is still a subsidy, in my opinion. What the government is basically trying to do in providing these subsidies is to cushion the effect of this high price that's derived from the fluctuating price of crude oil. People have argued, those who have argued in favor of retaining subsidy, argue that Nigeria is a producing large oil-producing country. We're the 10th largest producer of crude oil in the world. If you look at all the countries in OPEC, from Algeria to Qatar to Saudi Arabia to Algeria to Ecuador to Angola, most of them subsidize their petrol. So why shouldn't Nigeria? There's nothing wrong with subsidies, and I think everyone has agreed. I think there's a general consensus among civil society organizations, professionals, that this subsidy regime is not sustainable. I think last year we spent 1.4 trillion on subsidies. In 2011 we spent 2.4 trillion on subsidies. That's 1/3 of the federal budget. Basically, we're taking out of $5 billion, we take 1.5 trillion dollars out of the naira, out of the budget, and distribute it. And you don't distribute it amongst the people who need it, you distribute it amongst the people who don't need it for the most part. While government strives to try and build infrastructure, it's senseless to spend 1.4 trillion naira every year and increasing. And I think now we're at a point where the argument is not that subsidies must be sustained. It is that we must be satisfied that the monies derived from the subsidies are going to be used to do those things that we've always talked about, in building infrastructure, in building transport systems, in helping the vulnerable, most vulnerable in the society, which is what subsidies are designed to do.
Experts in their field relating to the oil sector also highlighted the bane of the downstream sector.
Subsidy cannot be completely eliminated in society where there is high level of poverty. Mechanism must be put in place to compensate social groups and businesses. What we are doing with the subsidy is that we are subsidizing corruption. And we cannot just say, okay, because we are subsidizing corruption, the only way is to remove it. If it's just to remove it completely, then you need to look at how will it affect poor people.
EBRA is acting as a regulator very good. But guess what? EBRA has 25 board members. And who are the members? Depot owners, marketers, transporters, the one who moves truck. So tell me, how can somebody who is a commercial operator be on the board of the regulator? They are the ones determining what happens in Nigeria, in the downstream. So when they plan a strike, the regulator cannot actually twist them. They take off all their trucks off the road, and then we are in the queue. Conflict of interest. They are the bane of part of the subsidy issues. Maybe it will not be 2 billion. Nobody knows the exact amount anymore per year on average.